Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Ritu Thamman. I am a cardiologist at the University of Pittsburgh, and I specialize in multimodality imaging, especially echocardiography. And today's topic is women pioneers. And after my brief interlude here, we will have a lively discussion with 4 other women who have been pioneers in this space. So a little bit about me. I have no disclosures, first of all. And pioneer, if you look it up, it means among the first to explore an area, and in this case, health tech, where we don't really think of it as a women's space per se, but in fact, there are many women that have entered this space at a very early point in time. In fact, I entered this space 10, 15 years ago, when it was just beginning to emerge as a solution for rural health, people who had no access to healthcare. And that was the only way we could get money to actually pay for this. And one of the first projects we did was on maternal mortality using blood pressure cuffs that we had from Vivify, a company that was subsequently bought out by another company. But at that time, we did not know how it would go, but we showed that in 6 weeks postpartum, these women that had hypertensive diseases of pregnancy could have better control of their blood pressure. And in fact, when we showed a reduction in hospital costs down the road, that really set the engine moving forward. At a time that was pre-COVID, at a time where we really were not focused on a very broad application of this for women. So what do we want in health tech? We women, we men, everyone. We want the technology to make our life better, and it has to be simple. And Steve Jobs said it best, right? He was a master at design, and he said it takes a lot of hard work to make something simple, to really understand what is the challenges that underlie. And that's the position that pioneers, be they the women or the men, face on a daily basis. And right at the beginning of COVID, we wrote an article on remote patient monitoring. And from that, I just took, where are we going? We want it to be simple, right? We want those telemedicine endpoints moving into the homes. Patients don't want to come into the hospitals. They don't want a sick care. They want to stay where they are. And that was the premise of a lot of the work. And so our strategy, has everyone eaten tofu? A lot of vegetarians here. So tofu stands for our strategy. When we evaluate a company, we evaluate a solution, we say, what's the technology, what's the operations, what are the finances, and what's the use case? And that's what you need to know. And we divided up our thinking. So there's a video component to telemedicine, there's a remote patient monitoring component, and then everything that we call a digital solution is in between. So you've got an app for menopause, and you've got an app for heart failure, and you've got one for AFib. That all falls in that middle range, and there can be some overlap. And the overarching themes here really extend into how well we are ready to use that technology. And the one common theme is the data. What are we inputting to get the right output? And as an imager, we are focused on providing the right care, not in a reactive way, but we want to be proactive, right? We want to click on that EHR that we all hate to use, but but yet we're all using it, and glean information so the next patient that I see, I can actually improve maybe their outcomes. And one of the papers, we got together with the American Society of Echo, and we wrote, what are the challenges? You know, you have data that is embedded in echoes. Everyone here uses echocardiograms. It's the most common test across this country. And the way the images are made, it's old technology that all the companies are making. They embed the patient information they burn it into the image. And us, as the researcher, then have to go in and devise a way for every image to cross it out. And that's ours, you know, that's asinine in a way because that's a waste of time. So we asked and we pleaded with the companies to please, we need this DICOM data in a way that we can cross out the PHI information and really gather it and make the metadata and make the analysis without being encumbered. And this was a way to do it that would make it scalable and make it so that I could take information from Pitt, where I am, and combine it with my friend Rima, who's at UCSF, and others across the country. But it's even beyond just the data cleaning and the scrubbing and getting it with the right tags. We have to be able to harmonize. Have any of you heard of the word harmonizing the data? You know that we have to figure out that words matter. And if I write an echo report at Pitt and say, cardiomyopathy, EF 50%, and my friend at Hopkins is saying, well, that's heart failure with reduced EF with an EF of 48%. How do those words then get combined so that we can, again, use that data in a way that makes sense? So we did this study based out of UCSF where we evaluated different machine learning approaches. And the bottom line is this. You need to look at the text very carefully so that I can share my data with your data and we can get that aligned in terms of the language, because when we feed it into the algorithm, whether we're using an NLP or an LLM, we can actually use it in a way that has benefit. So, and ontology is a word that you're going to hear a lot of because that's how we're mapping things and creating a framework. And we absolutely need to do that in order to have the best data, because if we don't have clean data, we're not going to be getting good results. And we're not going to have people, the clinicians, the end users, believe what is coming out of that black box. In addition, there's another piece of harmonization, which is how do we prevent the biases, right? So I wrote this paper recently about how if we're not careful with how we understand where the inputs are coming in, that we're going to have this continual bias. Because remember, whatever the source of the data is, at the point of harmonization, you know, we could have different processes by which our echoes are coming in. We could have different access points. If I'm using a patient-reported outcomes, do they have access to the same, are they part of our health system? Or are they out of our health system? All these biases then can be also infiltrated into this data, then gets perpetuated down the road. And this is a really key piece because all of us have that responsibility to really be aware, because we don't want to perpetuate those biases that are already so prominent in our worlds. And so with that, I would like to conclude and introduce the panelists that we will have come on stage here. Dr. Kathy Magliato, who is an eminent surgeon out of LA, Tatyana Kanseveli, founder and CEO of Open Health Network, Erin Spaulding, who is an assistant professor at Johns Hopkins School of Nursing, and Jayne Morgan, vice president of medical affairs at Hello Heart.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Ritu. You said imminent, but I thought she was going to say infamous heart surgeon. I was like, well, maybe that's not a compliment. It's all good, all good. So thank you so much for the AHA for allowing me to moderate this session. You know, I do, I guess, as a female heart surgeon, think of myself as a pioneer, at least in my field, for sure, because less than 4% of heart surgeons are women, and people always say, oh my goodness, you have paved a path for women in heart disease and heart surgery, and I think, yeah, I left a few potholes, so that's that. But the other reason why I think they asked me to chair is I'm also a pioneer as an entrepreneur. So I'm also the founder, CEO, and chief medical officer of a startup company called Cordex Systems. And at Cordex Systems, we've developed a novel cardiovascular technology that takes a direct measurement of vascular health, a unique measurement, but yet a measurement we've known about for more than 100 years and not had a practical way of measuring it clinically. And it's a metric that actually is linked to every risk factor for heart disease as well as MACE, and could potentially be used then to monitor changes directly in vascular health as we treat you, whether it's with medication or lifestyle changes. So, you know, like my colleagues, you know, I'm a pioneer in that aspect as well, because less than 3% or so of health tech entrepreneurs are actually women. And so I decided that 4% or less, and I'm doing it. So next week I'm either going to be an astronaut or a Kardashian, and it could frankly, you know, go either way. So with that, woohoo! Oh, you're voting for Kardashian. Great. I have the hair, I think. So anyway, I wanted to start off with talking with the panel a bit about what each of them are doing. And it's funny because I had asked them ahead of time, hey, can you send me some questions or things you want to discuss? And of course, you know, those kind of came in late, ladies, but you know, we're okay. But I actually was going to start with asking them questions about the Krebs cycle and respiratory oxygenation and how many ATPs are formed. The answer is 38 during an average Krebs cycle. But we won't hit them with that question. What I want to do is actually start with the last question I would ask. And then I want the panelists actually not to answer the question, but think about it, and at the end, we'll actually put that question out to the audience. So I want you to think about, if you could ask this audience one thing that they could do to help your mission, what would that one thing be? So maybe it's that you're raising capital, or maybe you're looking to build out your team bench, or maybe you're looking for resources in R&D. So what would you ask of this audience, what your needs are? So we'll do that one at the end. But first, I'd love to hear from you a little bit about, from each of you, what problem are you trying to solve in healthcare, and how are you going about doing that? So this is your chance to kind of give us your elevator pitch. So sadly, Tatyana, you're in the hot seat, because you're on the closest to me. So if you wouldn't mind starting, that'd be great. Thank you.
I wasn't prepared for that.
Oh, okay. You want to go to your questions? I'll go to your questions. How many ATPs are formed during a... No.
I just want to tell you a little bit about why I got into healthcare.
Yeah.
So 10 years ago, out of blue, I was diagnosed with cancer. And at that time, you know, as everyone else, I was in shock. But then I started thinking about why I didn't know about all the things that led to that diagnosis and how data and AI can potentially play a role in preventive or predictive of chronic diseases, personalized treatment, and improve outcomes. So we started AI company back then, and it was 10 years ago, and I was questioned by everybody. AI in healthcare, but I truly believed, and I never deviated from the vision and my vision of AI in healthcare. And I'm glad that now we're on the same stage. So what my company does, it had to build framework like patient sphere, constant care, trial sphere, the whole notion of all those advanced adaptive cross-disease deployed technologies from chronic pain, cardiology, oncology, was to create a framework that connects care team, support team, caregivers with patients and data that comes from devices, sensors, patient biodata, genetic data, all in the cloud, real-time available with AI engines to care team. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, so in essence, you're taking the chaos of data and creating a manageable system to be able to analyze that data. So in
Yeah,
a
but
sense,
it also
that's your
connects
problem and
with
solution.
like you have care team
Yes.
that have to create integrated care plan for any complex diseases, all the way from medication to like gathering data, and all that can be put
Sure.
with our
Across different
authoring all the way
modalities,
to,
yeah.
health coaches, caregivers, patients, devices, data immediately available back to
Wonderful.
the team.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Jayne, you're up.
My name is Dr. Jayne Morgan. I'm here from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm the Vice President of Medical Affairs for Hello Heart. I recently joined the company. I was with the largest healthcare system in the state of Georgia, Piedmont Healthcare, with 45,000 employees, 25 campuses, and had been there for 9 years, leading the cardiovascular research program, but also leading a lot of the community education and media and medical communications. I decided to transition really to Hello Heart at this part of my career because I had become increasingly focused in women's health, in the women's health space, specifically in menopause, pregnancy complications. Why is something that I call the big extrapolation? Why are we continuing to use data that was derived on men, and we're applying it not only to women, but we're applying it to minority populations. We're applying it to all kinds of things. So this big extrapolation, and this is how we practice medicine. And so I left Piedmont to join a company to begin to try to de-extrapolate what is happening to medicine, such that women can have confidence that the therapeutics and the medications that are approved by the FDA are relevant to them, are relevant to hormones, are relevant to menstrual cycles, are relevant to pregnancy complications, that we can understand that pregnancy complications actually are an indicator of an increased risk of heart disease for you later, and we need to have a warm handoff between the obstetrician and the cardiologist during that pregnancy. So all of those are the kinds of things that it seemed to me that it was going to be easier for me to gain traction outside of a large healthcare system, actually, where things move more quickly, as opposed to inside the health system. So I know that seems like an oxymoron, but that's actually really how it happens. So at Hello Heart, we have a digital remote blood pressure monitoring system. And if anyone's ever heard me talk about menopause, part of estrogen loss is stiffening of the arteries and a rise in blood pressure, along with elevated cholesterol. Cholesterol and estrogen share a common pathway in the liver, metabolic pathway. And so these are all of the things that have driven me to where I am in my career. We must have women's health that's representative of the population. At 51% of the population, we are not a niche market. And we have got to get away from this is a niche market. We are the dominant market, and we need to step in and make certain that we have medications and therapeutics that are relevant and specific to us.
Thanks, Jayne. And it's actually the stiffening of the arteries that my technology measures, which is why I've been stalking you for a couple of years to talk to you, and why we're going to chat later. But networking, especially among women, is the key to how we build our businesses. So I'm interested to talk with you about that. So go ahead, Erin. Talk to us a little bit about the problem you are trying to solve and how you're doing it. Thank you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Spaulding. I'm an assistant professor at Johns Hopkins School of Nursing. I would say there are probably, and I'll summarize briefly, but probably like 3 main areas that I'm focused on and problems that I'm trying to solve. The first is really my collaborative work that's focused on leveraging digital health interventions for secondary prevention of cardiovascular disease. So for example, we're leveraging digital health interventions for virtual cardiac rehab to reduce barriers to access to in-person cardiac rehab. The second is problem that I'm really working on solving is the lack of long-term wearable data in older adults, specifically in the oldest old population, 80 years of age and older. And so I'm currently leading a long-term wearable study in the ERIC cohort to solve that, and we'll be collecting long-term data on this population on physical activity, heart rate, sleep, and look at that data around hospitalizations, and then also associate that data with cardiovascular and neurocognitive outcomes. And then the third thing that I'm working to address is improving digital access and digital literacy in the older adult population. And that's nested within my work that I'm doing within ERIC. And so far, so good, because we've got almost 300 these individuals, 80 years of age and older, using a Fitbit device and using devices, and yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I want to go back to a common thread that I sort of heard from all 3 of you when we asked about, hey, what would you like to speak about, what questions? And it really was around mentorship. So each of you in some way talked about who in your life helped mentor you to where you are. And then what advice would you give to young women who are trying to get into the health tech field, which again has a very low percentage of women in it? Because I can tell you that whether I talk about myself as a cardiothoracic surgeon or I talk about myself as an entrepreneur, honestly, my answer to that question is I had no mentors. And that's why I'm so proud of you and love to meet you, because I'm going to consider all of you my new mentors. But let's hear from you about mentorship and what advice you'd give to young women. Thank you. Thanks. And we'll start with you, Erin, because we picked on Tatyana.
So I've been very fortunate. I've had mentors across the School of Nursing, Public Health, School of Medicine that have really supported my desire to work in health technology and research in health technology. And they've been both men and women who've really supported that desire, and they've really helped me find opportunities both in terms of leveraging digital health interventions for clinical trials as well as epidemiology studies. So I guess like in terms of advice for finding good mentors, I think it's not necessarily, at least in my case, it wasn't necessarily about finding someone who is a woman. I've had, like I said, I've had fantastic mentors that were both men and women, but really just finding like a good fit and someone who's going to sponsor you, and it's hard to put into words, but someone who's, really just has your best interests. I think it's important.
Thank you.
I'm like you. I've never had a mentor. So if you haven't had a mentor, you fail a lot, you fall a lot, you have a lot of bruises, you have a lot of missed opportunities, and you learn really the hard way. And maybe at this point in my career, the life of hard knocks maybe is why I had the fortitude to take the risk to leave a healthcare system and go to a startup, because actually of all the closed doors and the challenges as well that I have had. I think when we talk about mentorship, which is maybe better now, People tend to like to mentor people that they see as a reflection of themselves, something that they can relate to. But I think often if we can look past maybe some of the external, we see that we have a lot of things in common. If you look at someone like me, an African American, we're only about 3 or 4% of all cardiologists. And then if you look at females, we're less than 1%. So take a good look at me. I'm pretty rare. Here I am. And so, it's not that common to be able to find someone who's exactly aligned like me to be able to mentor. That being said, I've always mentored other people. I started an internship at Piedmont Healthcare. I brought in high school students. I brought in college students. I had grad students. I was responsible for all the structural heart fellows. And so I really poured my life and myself into mentoring others and bringing them along. And as many of you know, if you mentor, there is, you're writing letters of recommendation forever. It never ends. However, I really have enjoyed the teaching. I've enjoyed bringing students along. I've enjoyed trying to help them find where they are. And even though I have never benefited from it, because I haven't benefited from it, I think it has made me be more empathetic and more likely to reach out, and a better tutor, a better sponsor, a better mentor, a better representative of what I really would like to see people become and be within the medical establishment.
With me, I needed support and mentorship because I came from a country where I would say culturally women were not, in general, it wasn't acceptable for women to speak up and be visible. So I had amazing mentors when I was at Pricewaterhouse who empowered me to speak up because I was literally afraid to do that. And throughout my career, formal or informal mentorship was important due to me being new to the country, language, cultural, all of those things. And for women, I think I was fortunate enough to mentor a lot of women in the States, entrepreneurs. I did a lot of TEDx for women entrepreneurs, and also traveling with the State Department to different countries to empower women entrepreneurs in different countries. And I think the major thing women do, they hold themselves back. They're afraid that they will be laughed at. They're not as smart. They will not be seen. So we need to overcome that and surround us with people who will support you, your mission. And I always say that in my case, I had to face cancer that kind of like, okay, I have to do things that matter to me. You don't have to wait for that. If you're passionate, you're knowledgeable, and you know what you want to do, you should try to do it. In worst case scenario, you will learn. The next one will be better. And lastly, I just started a global initiative for women in Gen AI, where we have chapters everywhere. And it's, again, for women in technology to be able to support each other, mentor each other, and being seen and heard. Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Ritu, did you want to add a comment? Thank you.
Is this on?
It might not be because it should be on panelists.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
And if you can, I'll repeat the question.
Now, my mentors are my parents, who are both physicians. I was raised in, I have a sister, and my father always said to me, you can do, I don't have a son, and so you can do, you are my son, and so you can do whatever you want to do. And so anything I wanted to do was, yeah, if a man can do it, you can do it. It's no difference. You just have to set your mind to it. Then when I became a trainee, I was at Columbia, and I had the good fortune of having Mike Weisfeld as my chair. And he, out of 30 of us, 10 of us went into cardiology. So he, again, was a huge mentor. And then my third big mentor is my husband, who I also met at Columbia. And he was into technology before I even knew what technology was. He taught me email and, basic things. And all along has been a real champion. Back and forth we've been. And I think in my advice to young women is always, if you are in a partnership or in a relationship, make sure your partner is on board and is your biggest cheerleader, and have common goals, because you're going to spend a lot of time. And if they also have a passion for what you are passionate about, for me it was women in health and women in cardiology and the disparities that I was seeing from the get-go. But then you're doubling your effort if you have a strong partnership there.
Yeah, I love that you said that about your husband, being one of your mentors. So my husband's a liver transplant surgeon. So, we duke it out every night at the dinner table about what's the more important organ, the heart or the liver. And I always tell him, look, if you can buy it in a grocery store and eat it, how important could that organ possibly be? So I feel like, sorry, Ritu, I feel like I win, but he is one of my biggest supporters. So thank you. I want to mention something, go back to what Tatyana, what you said about things that hold you back. And I think, and I don't think this is unique to women, but you really touched on the fact that oftentimes fear and fear of failure holds us back. And I think as a surgeon, I look at fear differently, because if I fail in an OR, somebody dies. So we have to be able to face that epic failure every day and just move right through it. And that's not unlike what it is to be an entrepreneur. And so I want to also go back to something that Jayne mentioned. She mentioned something about risk and risk-taking. And, I think it's interesting. Most people think that when a surgeon goes into the operating room, that all we think about is, success, right? How am I going to succeed today? How am I going to get out of the operating room without having a patient in a body bag, right? Because that's essentially what we're talking about. And yet it's unbelievable, but we actually stand at the scrub sink, wash our hands, and think about nothing but risk, right? We think about, how am I going to fail today? What are the risks involved in this procedure, and how can I mitigate that risk? So my question to the panel is, when and I'm going to put like my venture capital hat on for a minute, it's okay, we don't have to hate those guys all the time, but when we look at programs and technology that we're building, we look at different levels of risk, and typically there's 5 we look at, right? It's basically management team, are they solid, are they risky? We look at the market, is it too big, too small? Ritu, you sort of mentioned that in your tofu analysis, which I loved, and I'm going to steal that. Is that patented? Because I'm taking it. Okay, it's not trademarked or patented. We look at money. Okay, is the company fully capitalized? Are they weak there? We also then look at IP. Do they have intellectual property that's solid and locked in? And then we also look at really globally, how does that company function in a global setting, and is there a market beyond just a U.S. market? And then lastly, if you're developing tech like I am, is that technology at risk? So those are kind of the 5 risks. So my question is, for each of you, and you can answer or not answer, depending on what you're comfortable with, but like, what risk are you sort of facing now in your companies or your programs that you're building, and how are you mitigating that risk? Sorry, it's a tough question.
When you look at growth of small companies, when you look at success, how are you measuring success? So when you look at small companies, generally you're measuring them in one of 2 ways. You're looking at either growth, you're looking at profits. Sometimes you can have both, but generally there's one or the other. When you're looking for investment capital, depending on where we are in the market, investors really will look at the growth of the company or the profitability of the company. And I think those are really the 2 primary measures. Now, when you are attracting talent to your company, especially for small companies, you need to have people who believe in the technology, understand it, and are willing to advocate and stand up for it. So this is not an environment like a large healthcare system where you can float a lot of people who are not fully engaged, but are doing their jobs and going home. To be successful in a startup, everyone that you hire must be fully engaged and must be fully on board. And if not, you need to be able to fail fast. In other words, cut your losses, and bring in other people who are fully engaged. The other thing with startup companies is that you need different people at different phases of the company. And so what you need at the beginning, it may not be what you need in the middle, may not be what you need later, and you have to be honest with that turnover, because again, like a large company, you're not going to be able to float a lot of fat. And it doesn't mean that the people are not valuable. It just means as the company moves and grows, that it then requires different levels of expertise. So managing a small startup and getting it to move forward is very different than driving a bus that's already been built.
Any other risk anybody's facing?
Yeah. I would say that the major risk technology companies are facing today is the pace of transformative disruption. And it's transformative, it's happening, and it's happening so fast that every time I see new announcement in generative AI space, that day I see dozens of startups going out of business. How you can manage what you do in technology space, considering disruptive nature and the pace of that innovation, I think that's a key. On the top of everything that you said, pretty valid, but I'm just saying that I personally, I had to write an article to explain to management team across any industry that we had waterfall technology on managing things, then we had agile, then we mixed agile with waterfall. However, we never had a situation where we have highly transformative, disruptive things happening, and those disruptions were happening with such fast paced. So how we can plan and execute things. I think everyone needs to think about that.
Thank you. Ritu, were you going to say something? Yeah.
I don't have a company, but as a academic, I would say that the risk is really our patients. So my go-to thinking is I'm doing this work because I know that if I don't do it, nobody else is going to do it. And I know enough that I could actually impact and help a woman's life or a man's life. And that's sort of the risk that I want to take on, but it's not a monetary risk, but it's something that drives me in order to get up every day and do the same thing and keep on learning, because we are so scarce in this field that if we're not out there, there's only 13% practicing female cardiologists in the country, and limited when you really get further on. It's you just have to do it for that reason.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And ladies, the thing I keep hearing, and I'm sure the audience feels the same way, is just your passion is beautiful and wonderful, and I'm just sorry, I'm feeding off that, so thank you. And we're getting close to our time, correct? But so I want to make sure I get to that last question, first question / last question. So you've got this great audience here. What do you need? How can this audience help you to fulfill your mission? So what is your ask of this audience today?
My ask is you sponsor a woman. Anyone that you know. I have a sponsor out here, is Mitch. We've worked on things together, and
where's Mitch? We point him out.
Yeah.
Mitch.
And so there are many ways, but that's invaluable. Any one of you could be a sponsor for another female. And that is worth its weight in gold, because that's really what we need.
Thank you.
Very simple. I think it's very hard for women in technology to get face time with male decision makers or anyone else, just to get a chance to discuss things. So my ask is to be open to the concept of women actually understanding technology, understanding business processes, healthcare, and listen to them.
I think my ask of the audience would be to think about there are only 3% of health tech companies that are led by women, that are actually founded by women and led by women. And when you are looking at some place to put your dollars, you think about these companies because 85% of all healthcare decisions are made by women. Women are 51% of the population. This is not a niche market. When we talk about risk, this is probably de-risking your portfolio. And you need to think of it in those terms when we look at data. The other thing to think about is take the time to look at somebody who doesn't look like you, who maybe looks like me, because we have more similarities than you think, and especially when you're in medicine, we're all training, we're all learning the same thing, we're all moving in the same direction, and try to have some degree of cognition of whether you have any inherent bias, because in the United States, we're so race conscious that we literally waste our resources. And our resources are our people. Our people are so valuable. So think about and check yourself with whether or not you have inherent bias with regard to who you're mentoring. Look at your mentees and ask yourself, why are these my mentees, and can I broaden to something else?
I think my ask is probably a little bit different. But yeah, I guess I just ask that when you're interacting with patients, potential research participants, that if they're older adults and, you're trying to think about, their use with health technology, that you don't kind of just discount them based on their age. From my experience, many older adults are really excited to learn how to use different technologies to help manage their health care, and they might need a little bit of additional support, but don't discount them.
Thank you, ladies. And it's funny, none of them asked for money. Did you notice that? And the sad truth of it is
I asked for investment.
Did you ask for investment?
I will
Okay, that
accept.
was, you really hid that. I mean, when
If you have.
So, and sadly, I think the number is 1.9% of funding, of venture capital funding, goes to companies led by women, and yet the data is very clear that those companies actually outperform companies founded by men. And I will tell you that for my company, I raised all the capital myself, and it was difficult, back-breaking work. It was basically pushing a rock up a hill, same rock, same hill, every single day. And the funding, whether it comes from the American Heart Association through grants or its equity-based capital, is particularly difficult for us. So with that, I'd like to conclude and wrap our session and thank each one of you lovely, wonderful new mentors in my life. So thank you so much for sharing your stories. And thank you, American Heart Association.
Thank you.
Oh, and we have a round table, right?
So we're going to do another panel on wearables and connected devices, and we need to be innovative, so we have a new format this year. So after the second panel, we're going to have roundtable discussions. So we'd love for the ladies and the women pioneers to join the panel, and if you're interested in that topic, and we'll have the connected devices at that roundtable. So we're going to have a 30-minute panel first, and then we'll break into the roundtable discussions. Okay?
Thanks, Pat.
Yep.
Thank you.